My name is Jack Hood. I'm president of the Arthur D. Shores, Robert S. Vance in the court. And tonight, as our special speaker, we have Robert Posey, who is an assistant United States attorney and a federal prosecutor, and currently serves as the deputy chief of the criminal division for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Alabama. He has previously worked as acting United States attorney and first assistant United States attorney. For his work as an assistant U.S. attorney, he received the Bradford Memorial Award of the National Association of Former U.S. Attorneys in 2002. From the Department of Justice, he received the John Marshall Award for trial litigation in 2004 and the John Marshall Award for supportive litigation in 2006. Robert is an Alabama native and a graduate of Washington and Lee University and the Cumberland School of Law. He also is a graduate of Leadership Birmingham and is a retired officer in the U.S. Army Reserve. Mr. Posey's talk tonight is the reinvestigation of the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. Please listen closely. This is a terrific presentation. Robert?
Thanks a lot, Jack. Especially because of the setting. I do this sort of casually, and for people who are not very familiar with the history of Birmingham during the Civil Rights era, I start out with a bit of a introduction to Alabama and Birmingham in 1963. I would recommend to anybody that's interested, Barnett Wright, who's a local writer, did a timeline of Birmingham in 1963 that's very comprehensive on a lot of side issues that impact the church bombing and politics of the moment in 1963. But in 1963 in Birmingham, we had one of the deadliest, what was at the time, one of the deadliest terrorist bombings on American soil. There had been a few others in the teens and 20s, Wall Street and police departments, this, for its time, was a really unusual and significant event. And the reason for the bombing that, in the opinion of those that did the prosecution, was partly opposition of some citizen groups to actions of the federal government in desegregation of Birmingham city schools. But it was mostly a crime committed by angry white men who hated black people. And if you're, again, interested in a more comprehensive, a very comprehensive history of Birmingham and the civil rights movement in general, is a three-part volume written by Taylor Branch, who you may have heard of. And in the preface to his book, he says this about the racial situation. He says, almost as color defines vision itself, race shapes the cultural eye, what we do and do not notice, the reach of empathy, and the alignment of response. And as we did this investigation and talked to every living Klansman that had been associated with these folks in the federal grand jury, and all the people that were still living that investigated this, that kept ringing true to us. Today, of course, the church and the Civil Rights Institute is a new member of our national park system, the Birmingham Civil Rights National Monument. It is one of the highest growing tourist attractions in the state, if not the highest. Kelly Ingram Park, we're all familiar with. But this is the way the church looked in 1963. And if you will look in the bottom right corner of this photograph, you see a set of steps leading up to a door covered by an awning. That was a back entrance at the time, no longer exists today. But just right where the bottom of those steps meets the ground, you'll see in later photographs there was a window, and the window opened onto the ladies' lounge in what was then the basement of the church. And somebody put a bomb under that set of stairs that went off Sunday morning, September 15th, 1963. In 1963, John Kennedy was president. J. Edgar Hoover was the director of the FBI. In January of '63, George Wallace, in his inaugural address, promised segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. And the Ku Klux Klan was an important political force in the state of Alabama. In the spring of '63, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Council targeted Birmingham for their nonviolent direct action program to protest the segregation of public facilities, department stores, lunch counters, variety stores in the city of Birmingham. In April, the Birmingham City Commission obtained a court injunction against Dr. King and the marchers. And this is an odd period of Birmingham history because the voters of Birmingham had already decided to switch from a city commission form of government, and Bull Connor was the public safety commissioner in the city commission. They had voted to switch to mayor-council form of government. They had an election in March. Albert Boutwell defeated, got into a runoff with Bull Connor, and then in the April runoff, April 2nd runoff, defeated Bull Connor. But the city commission filed an election challenge and refused to vacate their offices in City Hall. So in April of 1963, when all of these events were happening, Birmingham had a newly elected mayor council and a hanging on by tooth and claw city commission that both sought to exercise leadership in the city of Birmingham. And a lot of the events, like fire hoses, dogs, that was carried out by Bull Connor acting as a defeated mayor but trying to hold on to his public safety commission power. But anyway, the commission, still claiming the authority to act for the city, got an injunction against King and the SCLC. And on April 12th, 1963, Dr. King was arrested and locked in Birmingham City Jail for violating that injunction. While there, he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail, which had a date of April 16th on it, where he referred to Birmingham as probably, quote, probably the most segregated city in the United States, close quote. The Birmingham jails were literally filled with marchers, and by early May, the SCLC and the leadership of the movement was starting to have trouble getting adults who were willing to go to jail. The ones that were willing were pretty much in jail. And so they turned to children, high school age children. And there was a radio DJ on WENN named Tall White, and he went by Tall Paul on the radio. I don't think anybody at this table, except Jack, and you grew up here, would have been old enough to have heard Tall Paul on the radio. But and he lived right next to the 16th Street Church in a rooming house. But he would use code language to communicate to his listeners when there was going to be a rally and a march event, and children would skip school and meet at the church for what they call the mass meeting, and then begin a demonstration. They would often just line up school buses outside the church, and the marchers would come out of the church and down the road, the police would escort them in the school bus and off to jail. But the children were an important part of the movement, and we think part of the reason that the bombers were motivated to bomb the church on September 15th. On May 9th, a settlement was announced. A settlement of the protest had been negotiated by a committee of black and white business leaders and the leadership of the movement. And in this photograph on the right is Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and in the middle is Reverend Shuttlesworth and Dr. King on the left, announcing the settlement. At this time, since World War II, there have been almost 50 bombings of black-owned residences and businesses in Birmingham, none of which have been solved by Birmingham police. George Wallace, June 11th, had this famous stand in the schoolhouse door to block the registration of two students at the University of Alabama, Vivian Malone and James Hood. And he kept his campaign pledge by standing in the schoolhouse door. The general in charge of the Alabama National Guard walked up to him and asked him to stand aside, which he did. That general later formed a real estate company that Jack and I leased our building from, Graham Company. Henry V. Graham was the general in charge of the Alabama National Guard. In his stand in the schoolhouse door, this was not the first time that African Americans had been registered at the University of Alabama. The first to register was in 1956. A student by the name of Arthurine Lucy was registered, admitted, and attended for a time until she was expelled for her own protection because of the unrest at the school, apparently. When we indicted two people for this bombing, we had to try them separately. When we were doing jury selection for the first, questions were asked about, you had any connection to it, any of your relatives involved in the protest. One lady named Foster raised her hand. Yes, my mother was involved in the movement. And then we had a break overnight. The defense team did their homework, and Ms. Foster was Arthurine Lucy's daughter. It was potentially on our denier, or it was on our denier, potentially on our jury, but it was caught by a research-minded defense attorney.
Was she struck?
Yes. President Kennedy had federalized the Alabama National Guard, which was how General Graham had the occasion to do that. But that was in June. Then August 28th had the March on Washington and Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. September 4th of '63, back in Birmingham, police battled demonstrators at Graymont Elementary School and Ramsey High School with many protesters like these waving Confederate flags and anti-immigration placards. These protests are in response to order of District Judge Clarence Allgood of this district and the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals to permit desegregation of 3 Birmingham schools: West End High School, Graymont Elementary, and Ramsey High School. That was September 4th. September 10th, 3 previously all-white schools were integrated. These are students registering at Graymont Elementary. You probably recognize on the left-hand side of this lawyer Arthur Shores, after whom I guess this court is named, who represented, that's Mr. Anderson and his sons in the center of the frame. So September 10th, 3 previous all-white schools were integrated. 5 days later, on September 15th, the church was bombed. There had been all week a banner out. If you see that in the center of the photograph, on the bottom you see an announcement board, a bulletin board sort of thing. There had been a banner draped across that all week announcing Youth Sunday on September 15th. So the children of the church were going to be leading worship service and preaching this Youth Sunday. So 5 days after integration, Youth Sunday, we thought that was not a coincidence. We thought it was intentional. The white supremacists had lost the battle over form of government, had lost the court battle, and were lashing out. Cynthia Wesley was 14 years old on September 15, '63. She had been adopted by the Wesleys. She was their only child at that time. Mr. Wesley was an elementary school principal, and Ms. Wesley was a teacher. Denise McNair was 11 years old. She was the only child of Chris and C. McNair, both of whom were teachers at that time. She was a playmate of Condoleezza Rice, whose father was a Presbyterian minister in Birmingham. At that time, they were in the same kindergarten class, and Secretary Rice has since recalled that she was at her father's church a few blocks away on 6th Avenue North, and heard the blast at 16th Street Church and felt the concussion. Carol Robertson was 14 years old. Her parents were teachers. Her grandmother had been on the biracial committee that had been established by Mayor Boutwell to deal with the racial situation in Birmingham. And Addie Mae Collins was 14 years old at the time. This is a younger picture of her. She and her sister Sarah were both excited about their part in Youth Sunday, and they had both gone to the ladies' lounge in the basement of the church with these other girls to freshen up between Sunday school and morning worship hour. And this is the window at the bottom of the stairs there into the ladies' lounge. And this is that same window in the middle of the screen here after the bomb exploded. You can see that the concrete stairs were pretty much vaporized by the blast, and the rubble stone foundation of the church building also became airborne. And we'll have some shots from inside, but the damage to the children was, of course, pretty horrific. This is a clock that was across the street from the church that quit working at after 10:20 that morning. That's about the closest estimation to the time of the blast. There was a local response by firefighters in Birmingham Fire Department. It was called Station Number 1 at the time, which was right there near City Hall. You can see one of the fire trucks to the left of this frame. Ironically, perhaps, that was the same fire station that had been called to use fire hoses against demonstrators. So the firemen from there were the first responders and helped recover the bodies of these victims, and one of them testified at our trial. And that car in front of the fire truck on the left, we're going to have some other pictures of it, but it belonged to Mr. Sam Rutledge. It was a 58 Oldsmobile that he had parked next to the church when he arrived that morning. And he testified that he was kind of a car aficionado. He said it was in pristine condition when he parked it. The explosion blew out the windows on the 16th Street side. This is the biggest window on the 16th Street side. The title of it is Christ the Good Shepherd, and many people found it significant that the face of Jesus being blown out is among the only damage to this. Glass and debris was scattered throughout the sanctuary. They were having Sunday school classes, or had just finished having Sunday school classes in the various parts of the sanctuary. Sunday school was over, and people were gathering for the worship service at the time of the blast. So other damage to the interior of the sanctuary. That's another view of Mr. Rutledge's car. So the FBI responded the day of the explosion. They sent a team from the FBI crime lab. They climbed over the roof of all the neighboring buildings. They took samplings from the area where the blast occurred, the restroom that the girls were in, all the surrounding surfaces, looking for traces of an explosive or components of a device of some sort to try to determine the nature of the device and the origin of the device. They found no trace evidence of explosive, so there was no evidence of what kind of explosive was used. They found no components of a device, so there was no evidence of what kind of device. Did it have a timer? Was it dynamite? Was it some other sort of explosive? So, this was in 1963. We tried the first defendant in 2001. Indicted both of them in 2000, tried the first one in 2001. One thing we had to prove was this was a bomb. And so we had nobody to say there were explosives used. Some of the church members had speculated that it was maybe a gas explosion of some sort. One sweet little old lady said she thought the Russians had bombed them because this was in the height of the Cold War. So the FBI did a test and videotaped it at their Quantico facility. So they took two undamaged vehicles, parked them in a field, got 10 pounds of TNT and set it off in proximity to those vehicles. And the difference was that after the explosive, the vehicles that were before the explosion, undamaged, both had this crumpled paper look to the sheet metal, like you see on here. It looks like somebody's crumpled a piece of paper and straightened it out. And explosive experts testified that that was caused by a shock wave created by a high explosive explosion, as compared to a gas bomb is not a high explosive. So a gas explosion happens very differently and does not create a shock wave like this. So that was our evidence of a bomb. There's also some projectile damage on all these vehicles in addition to the shock wave damage. Again, this was a solid concrete staircase.
Just curious, did just from a scientific standpoint, did the FBI say that the reason there was no residual chemicals was because the heat was so strong, or because it had just been blown so far away that it no longer existed?
All they could tell us was they didn't find any.
Got it.
They didn't want to give a reason.
I was just wondering. Okay. And this is based on the FBI report back in the 60s, that's what you were, yeah, okay.
Yeah, they did the test shoot just for our trial.
Got it.
And we had a slow motion video of it, which was pretty cool. In the first trial, the court allowed us to play the video, but would not allow us to have sound on the video because the court found that it was too prejudicial. Because with sound and seeing an explosion, especially in slow-mo with everything going up slowly and falling down slowly, your mind, especially after seeing these other photographs of the crime scene, you just sort of automatically, it was, you put made you feel like you were there.
Can I ask again, also just curiosity, in your trial, who was the district court judge on the first and second case?
Jim Garrett was the district judge